Sarah.
Melissa.
What are we doing today?
We are talking about Kill Your Darlings by Peter Swanson.
Sarah, it's been a minute since we've been in this environment. It is so great to be back on Rogers TV for this new season of Could Read, Should Read, Must Read.
Yes, Melissa. I feel like the last time we were together on here was like right at the beginning, on the cusp of the summer season. And here we are in the first days of fall.
Yes, and maybe still clinging to some of those last shreds of summer, but I think they're on their way out, unfortunately. And so for anyone who might be new to the show or catching us for the first time, welcome aboard. This is Could Read, Should Read, Must Read. I'm Melissa Halford, and I'm here with Sarah Wolfberg, and this is a literary podcast. We take turns reading and recommending books. Sarah and I met in graduate school on the St. John's campus of Memorial University in 2008, and we've kept in touch ever since. We've been really close, and not only through our love of books and literature, but our love of each other and so many other common interests that we have. And we have managed to keep in touch partly because of this podcast. So we get together, we talk about books, we share our recommendations, and we're looking forward to having you enjoy these recommendations with us. We end every episode by asking each other the question, is this book a could read, a should read, or a must read? And that's the format of the show. And this is our second season with Rogers. We've been recording together in an audio-only format since December of 2023. But we love to be able to, share a visual element of things with you as well.
And I feel like this might be like a little bit of an anniversary for us on Rogers TV. I think this is about 1 year since we started this venture on our visual podcast. So I just want to say, happy Rogers TV anniversary, Melissa.
Oh, happy Rogers TV anniversary to you as well. And although I have not read Kill Your Darlings by Peter Swanson, which is what we're going to talk about today, my spidey senses, as well as the Google Doc that you shared with me earlier, suggest that maybe talking about anniversaries could be a good segue into our discussion about this book. So, Sarah, without further ado, on this first episode of this season, tell us about Kill Your Darlings by Peter Swanson. Can you give us a summary about this book, and also how did it end up in your hands?
I certainly can. I will say that I would argue that our marriage and the marriage that we celebrate every time we gather for this podcast is definitely a happier and a healthier one than the two protagonists in Kill Your Darlings.
And hopefully,
that would be,
sorry.
That's all right. And that would be Wendy and Tom Graves, who are our protagonists in this book. And to describe the book, it's a mystery. But instead of your average mystery being a whodunit, this is a whydunit. And so the entire story takes place in reverse. So we start with Wendy and Tom Graves when they're in their mid-50s. The year is 2023. And we work backwards all the way to 1982. And right off the bat, I'm going to share, the opening line just to kind of give you a good feel for, kind of how we jump into this story. So, opening line. The first attempt at killing her husband was the night of the dinner party. Wendy had been cajoled into hosting by Marcia Lever, the head of the English department. So that's how we're opening this book. So we know that automatically there's going to be at least an attempted murder, if not a murder itself. And our job as readers is not to figure out who did it, because we know exactly who did it, but we want to figure out why this murder occurs. And so it's a really interesting way to, get into a mystery book. You know what happens, but you're just trying to figure out, like, how did we get to this point? And especially when you look at the couple, and what's great about this book is that you kind of get the perspectives of both of the characters of Wendy and Tom. So you really get their kind of interior thoughts, what their motives are, but you're really trying to figure out, like, okay, so why does Wendy want to murder her husband Tom, especially when, from appearances, it seems like they're just living, an average, middle to upper class academic lifestyle in New England.
It's funny, I listened to an interview with Peter Swanson earlier today in preparation of our conversation, and he was kind of joking about, you don't really have to worry about spoilers when it comes to this book. He's like, I pretty much lay it all out in the first line, but he didn't read the first line, so you really close the gap on that for me. And this is a new release as far as I understand it. It came out recently, right? So you got this straight from the publisher.
Yeah, this was 2025, and I encountered it, as I do with a lot of books, at my local library on their new release shelf. But I think, based on some of the other books that I've read and authors that I've read, this book I was seeing new releases coming out, and my algorithm, through Google and through Instagram. And through Goodreads, and it was recommended that this might be a book I might be interested in. When I read the kind of brief description of what it was, I thought, oh, I'm gonna put that on maybe a TBR list. And then as soon as I saw it on that shelf at my library, I thought, oh, that's familiar. I think I'm gonna just pick that one up. And I grabbed it, and it's a relatively quick read. It is less than 300 pages, which I know is right up your alley, Melissa.
Absolutely.
And really, because there is this element of, why does this happen? What's the bottom of the story? There's lots of little clues that you're getting as you read, and it really does, I think, motivate you to move forward through the narrative. And so it's a quick read, not just because it's a shorter book. It's a quick read because you really want to get to the bottom of this.
I am not inclined typically to read this type of book, and you know that as well as anyone else who listens to our show regularly. But my husband is. He loves reading this kind of mystery. There's the whodunits, cozy murder mystery type book. So believe it or not, I've actually read 2 Peter Swanson books, because they're always sort of kicking around at our house. One of them we've actually talked about here at the Rogers Studio, is the Christmas Guest, which is like a novella that he wrote a few years back. And then this summer, so purely by coincidence, we both were reading Peter Swanson books this summer. I read A Talent for Murder. And I actually had it as an audiobook and a physical book. And I was doing that thing where I was listening to it and reading it at the same time, which I'm loving doing. If anybody else is doing this, I think it's so fun. I find if I hit it on 1.7 speed, it's exactly how fast I read, and it keeps me really locked in. So anyone who's having issues with attention span while reading, this is the ticket, having the audiobook and the physical copy at the same time. And I totally know what you mean about it being a page turner, because you are unraveling something, or in this case, it sounds like you're raveling something. But one of the things I found, particularly about the Christmas Peter Swanson book that I read, and I know it's probably because I have a bit of a weak stomach, or this isn't a genre that I read in very often, I found it kind of gruesome. There were a couple of scenes that I actually found vividly violent. And I didn't really like it. It kind of turned me off a little bit. So I'm wondering, in terms of the tone of this book, was it particularly gruesome, or was that not the way that this book was put together?
Definitely not the way that this book is put together. And I think because these 2 people and this couple, they're just average people living in the world. You could encounter them at a dinner party. You could encounter them at your local, liberal arts college or university. And by all means, they just seem like normal people. And even the way that the first kind of murder that occurs in this book is dispatched, you're not getting it in real deep, gruesome detail. And then any kind of violence, I would say, that happens throughout the rest of the book, there's a disconnection from the activity. There's only one scene that I found particularly vivid. I guess I would say a scene of violence, and so I would believe that someone that has maybe a little bit of a weaker stomach for this kind of stuff would be able to get through this pretty easily and not be super squeamish.
Okay, fair enough. I will note that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about this title. And, you know, we talk often about covers and titles and all those sort of first interactions with things. And then, you know, especially the titles, because the authors are so involved in those. We know that the covers sometimes have a little bit more to do with, you know, the sales side of things. But this is a great title. And even when you posted a picture of it on our social media, it got, you know, a bit more attention maybe than some of our other posts get, because I do think it's striking, it's kind of cool, and the title does draw you in, I think. So where did this come from, or what is the relevance of the title Kill Your Darlings in this book?
So what I really loved about the title, and it is always interesting what authors decide to name their books, and that can either draw you in and it can really kind of tie in, it can be clever, it can be very obvious. And I guess this is a nice balance. So Kill Your Darlings is a term that is often attributed to William Faulkner. And I have a little note because I wanted to kind of get it correct. He is quoted as saying, "In writing, you must kill all your darlings." And essentially what it means is that writers must be ruthless when they are writing, and in particular, editing their work. That you cannot get sentimental about characters, you cannot get sentimental about side plots or turns of phrase that you happen to have a lot of affection for, that in order to make a tight narrative, you really need to be prepared to cut stuff out that doesn't necessarily belong there, or that maybe weakens your story in any kind of way. And I like that because, you know, this idea of killing your darlings in a literary sense ties in so well with both of our main characters. So both of them are writers in their own specific way. So Tom Graves is a English professor. He works at a liberal arts college in Massachusetts, like right on the seaside. And his wife, Wendy, is a published poet. She's only had one book that's been published, but you know, she's the only one out of the two of them that's actually been published. She's kind of a little bit of a failed writer. And when you think about these characters and their relationship with creativity and their relationship with writing and their maybe success with writing, it does end up really making sense that Wendy, out of the two of them, is the one to have been published, because ultimately she is the one that is far less sentimental and far more prepared to kill her darlings, to get rid of things that don't make sense in her life or in a piece of work.
Okay,
really
so
like
as you know, and I have not read this book, but based on just what you just said, Wendy sounds like a bad guy. So do we dislike Wendy, or do we have any level of sympathy for Wendy?
All right, so you know I always do this, Melissa, and I'm not sure if you have watched this show or not, but as I was reading this book and I was thinking about the character of Wendy Graves, all I kept picturing was the actress Laura Linney, but in the particular role of Wendy Bird in the show Ozark, which is a Netflix show, a very popular one. And I'm not sure if you've watched it all, but it's a bit of a dark story.
Believe it or not, I have. 9 out of 10 times my answer to this is no, because you are the go-to for all the pop culture things. But I have watched all of Ozark, some of it twice. Love it. So as soon as you said this person reminds me of, I was like, I bet she's going to say Wendy Bird. So I'm so excited. Okay, carry on.
Yeah. And I do actually wonder if Peter Swanson was actively really engrossed in watching Ozark as he was working on this, because I feel like those two Wendy characters are so close in the sense that they're very they're very calm, they're very rational, relaxed, but also very ruthless. And I would argue sociopathic, really, when it comes down to it, but that they're not people that you dislike, but they do some really ugly things. And so you don't dislike Wendy. And in fact, I would say some of her observations, because she's someone that's always watching. And so when you're reading her side of the narrative, she's constantly kind of looking at the situation she's in. She's looking at the other characters. She's making judgments. And some of them are quite understandable. I mean, in particular, especially, it's right off, I mean, obviously, from the first line of the book that she's, thinking about murdering her husband, Tom. But you start really understanding about kind of some of the less savory aspects of Tom's personality. He's an alcoholic. He's a blowhard. Not that that would justify murdering him per se, but you really get this sense of like why she would have displeasure in being around him and why being married to him, especially because they've been together for quite a long time at this point, when we first meet them in 2023. And you can see that she has seen all of the ugly sides of him. She knows him, and all of his faults and all of his weaknesses. And sometimes I feel like when you are in a long-term relationship like that and the kind of the gloss has worn off, the shine has worn off the relationship, it's easy to kind of pick your partner apart, and you can see that. And so you can understand where she's coming from in certain respects, but the why she would actually go to the lengths of thinking about murdering him. And I mean, it's a spoiler, but it's not a spoiler. She does murder her husband. You kind of are like, okay, there's something going on. And even from page 6, so we're very early on in the book, you get that there's a secret that the two of them share. And you get that it's a secret that has them locked in together, and it explains why they are together, even if they're unhappy with one another. And you get that Tom is a little bit of a loose end. He's a little bit of an unreliable person to be keeping a secret with, because as they're hosting this dinner party and they're with colleagues of Tom's from the university, he starts talking about how he has been thinking about writing kind of like a murder mystery. And he starts kind of explaining some kind of overarching ideas that he wants to explore. And right away, Wendy's kind of spidey senses, and the fact that he's drunk and she's sober, she starts thinking, you've got to be kidding me. He cannot be writing about something that I think he might be writing about. Oh. And so she sneaks off at one point during the dinner party. She goes to his computer. She opens up his laptop. She, of course, knows his password, goes in, and she wants to see what he's written. And right away, she realizes that son of a bitch. He's writing about the one thing that he should not be writing about. And it happens to be linked to a secret that they share. Some terrible deed that was committed in the past, in the beginning of their relationship, that should not be public at all, and is something that they've both vowed to kind of take to their grave, something that's united them. And so right away you start seeing that there's a motive, even though if you don't know exactly what that motive is. And then of course, as the story unfolds and you start going backwards in time, you see, oh, so this is the secret. Oh, so this is the motive. And you also understand why the two characters are so different. because they're processing what this secret is and they're keeping it in their own ways. And it's weighing on them in very, very different but distinct ways. And so Tom's alcoholism is no surprise. Tom is also a philanderer. There's no surprise. Tom is someone who is subject to emotional kind of breakdowns and anxiety attacks. And again, as you go through the story, you start piecing it together and understanding like, oh, Tom is not dealing well with the secret that they're keeping, and that there's this real urgency in him to be punished, to punish himself, and to be relieved of this secret. And Wendy does not share that. So
I'm not surprised that, Peter Swanson, I think he's put out a book a year since 2014 or something. So even though you might think there'd be a tendency to just sort of crank it out at that point, I think the opposite is true with him in that he is, refining his craft and making sure that what he's putting out is, it's got more layers than just like the classic whodunit, and that maybe he's challenging himself as a writer in terms of like the form that he's chosen for this particular book. It sounds like it is very much about Wendy and Tom and sort of their personal relationship, very much about the secret that they share. But are there other peripheral characters? Tell me more about who fills out the rest of the cast in this book.
So certainly you get to know some of the colleagues that Tom has in his department, not very well. I mean, they kind of pop up here and there throughout the story. They also share a son named Jason, who at the very beginning of the story is probably in his, like, I'd say early 20s. He's a university student. And I would say, although you don't know him well, you do see him. You see him first in his 20s. You see him as a teenager. You see him as an adolescent, a child. And then, of course, you actually see when they first end up finding out that they're pregnant with him. And he, I would say, is the one good thing to come out of this relationship between Wendy and Tom, because it's the one thing that, even though that they have resentments towards one another, and on Wendy's part to Tom, disdain for him, they have this shared true love for him, and the fact that he is a product of them and their relationship. And you can tell that they took their parenting of him very seriously and wanted to raise a good human being. And it seems like they were pretty successful in that. Other than that, it really is a Tom and Wendy story. And, we've talked about this in the past, about this idea of plot-driven stories, character-driven stories, and the difference between the two. And certainly this is plot-driven in the sense where you really are trying to get to the bottom of why things happened, and how they came to be, and what all these secrets are, because you find out that there's actually many secrets that these two are keeping, both together and from one another. But it is, I would say, just as much as it's plot driven, it is truly character driven, because you're really getting into these internal lives of the two characters. You're sympathizing with them, you're pitying them, you're judging them, and it really is them, and it's their story. And what I think that Swanson does well in the book is, you come to them when they're at the worst of their relationship. Tom is barely functioning as a person. Wendy is barely tolerating him as a human being at this point. And then, when you get to the final pages, I should say, of the book, it's when they're first meeting, and you're seeing how they started, and you're understanding, like, oh my goodness, like who these two people were as children, because they met when they were young. They met when they were 14. They've known each other for a long time. But and I really think he does a good job on kind of, building their relationship backwards, if that makes sense, because they start at a fractured point, and then you gradually get to them when they're whole people, and people as a unit that feel connected and feel destined to one another. In another way that I feel like the title comes into play in Kill Your Darlings, And the fact that these two characters have a writing background and are writers is this idea of how we as people create narratives for ourselves. We create the story that we live. We tell ourselves stories about what our life is and how it's supposed to be. And really, I feel like for both Wendy and Tom, from an early age, they are creating the story of their lives as individuals, and it involves the other person as like this integral part, and that they're destined and fated to be in one another's lives. And you can see how things kind of come into place because of this thought that was established and this kind of plot and storyline that they both individually created for themselves as young people, that ended up drawing them together and keeping them together. And I found
Almost
that
like
really fascinating.
almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy or something, like they had already
Yeah.
decided what would happen and then they're just bringing it to fruition.
Yeah, and yeah, they're actively kind of writing the story of their lives. And so I this is on page 270. And so we're seeing them at their freshest, at their youngest. This is the first time they've connected. They're on a school trip to Washington, D.C., and they made a little detour with a teacher to see the Exorcist steps, because the film The Exorcist is something that they connect on. They sit next to one another on a bus ride to this field trip, and they don't know each other and they're trying to talk about things they might have in common. And Tom's sister had watched The Exorcist and had scared the loving Jesus out of him, with the story of The Exorcist and all the details, the gory details of that story. And then it turns out that The Exorcist is one of Wendy's favorite films. And she tells him, we're going to Washington, D.C., and Georgetown in D.C. is where the story takes place, and the Exorcist steps, where I believe a priest may have met his end in the film, that they're based on real steps. And so they go to find these steps, and that's where they share their first kiss. And it's not really a spoiler. It's also where Tom meets his end years later in 2023, when Wendy pushes him from the top of the Exorcist steps and he falls to his death. But I want to read this little piece. Mrs. Ackles was coming back toward them, a smile on her pretty face. "Was it all you hoped it would be?" she said. "Yeah," Wendy said. Miss Ackles walked ahead of them, back toward the rest of the group. Tom and Wendy's hands were intertwined again, and Wendy thought about how she'd lied about the kiss being her first. But she hadn't really lied, because tonight had been her first good kiss, the best kiss. She pulled herself closer to Tom, thrilled suddenly to be alive. It was like being introduced to a room in her house she had never been shown before. Tom said, quietly, only to her, "I feel like we're in a movie." Yes, she thought, it's like that too. And I feel like, so right there, that's the beginning of their story. And it's the
Right.
beginning of this kind of shared idea. And later on, she writes poetry about him. And they connect at a conference when they're in their 20s. And you can see that they've both meant a lot to one another, and that they both felt, and they both share a birthday. They were born the same day and the same year. And so they just have this kind of fated idea of one another. Like, I am supposed to be with this person. This person is important to my story.
And even the
And I
fact that
really,
oh, sorry, but she at one point says something like, well, I lied, but I didn't really lie. So that she's able to, because she's directing the story, and whether or not it's a lie or whether it is or isn't a lie is up to her and how she frames it. She can excuse it. So I'm assuming then
That's
she,
right.
throughout her life, can excuse other behavior based on how she frames it or writes it as a narrative in her own mind.
Yeah, and I really do feel like out of the two of them, Wendy is the true author. She may be a poet, a published poet, but she's the author of their story. And she's the one that's driving all the action. She's the one that's making the decisions, including the difficult decisions to kill your darlings. And Tom is more of like he's a participant, but he's a passive participant. he's one that, although he makes decisions, he's in a way being manipulated. And what's interesting too, and some of these movies I know about, obviously The Exorcist being the horror film that's kind of mentioned, and alluded to in the beginning and the end of the book. But Double Indemnity, which is a film noir from, I believe it's the 1940s or 50s, is a film that's referenced throughout the book. And that is, a scheming woman using a man to dispatch of a husband. And then later on, the film Body Heat, which is an erotic thriller from the 1980s, is another film that is discussed. And again, that is the story of a kind of a femme fatale who is using a man and to order to, in order to get something done that she wants done. And she's not sympathetic about it. I have another little excerpt that I want to read really quick. Wendy ended up watching Body Heat twice before returning it. Some actor she recognized from the movie Diner gave a great speech about how there were 50 ways to fuck up a crime, and that only a genius could come up with 25 of them. And what turned out to be the big fuck up for the two murderers in Body Heat, besides the fact that Kathleen Turner was only ever using William Hurt, was that they'd been spotted together as a couple before they committed the murder. Wendy decided then and there that Tom and she needed to be virtual strangers until they met again at some undecided literary festival after Wendy was a widow. So that gives a little kind of foreshadowing as to what's to happen, but it's a good reference.
I did hear in this interview today that there is a high likelihood that this is going to be produced as a film. And apparently the Wendy character is supposed to be played by, do you want to take a guess? It's not Laura Linney. She's a very pretty woman.
Oh, Julia Roberts. Oh, yeah, I could totally see that, Julia Roberts.
There you go. Okay, I think it is about that time that you've now kind of created what I would call feels like a simmer, like I've got all the bits and pieces have come together and these ideas are all simmering and percolating together. So the next step is for you to tell me whether or not I need to go read this for myself. So Sarah, is Kill Your Darlings by Peter Swanson a could read, a should read, or a must read?
Melissa, I am happy to say that Kill Your Darlings is a should read. It is a solid, rock solid should read. Will it change your life? No. So that's why it's not a must read. But as we're heading into this fall season and we're thinking about, things that maybe are a little bit more sinister, a little bit more spooky, not that this is a spooky book per se, but it certainly is a sinister one. And there is definitely murder and mayhem that happens. And it's a real kind of internal, you're thinking about it. The wheels are turning in your mind. I think it is a should read. I think you should read it. It's interesting in the way that the plot is devised. It's an interesting read because it is a backwards narrative. And because it is a why done it and not a who done it. And I think that innately makes it more interesting. So should read for this one.
Amazing. Thank you. And it brings me so much joy to see all those tabs along the side of that book. I love that process. So that's awesome.
I trim them as I always have to trim my tabs,
They look as tidy as I would expect of you. Thank you so much. It is great to be back on this couch talking to you, and I'm looking forward to the rest of this season. Bye for now.
Awesome. All right. Bye-bye.